30 podcast, a place where we talk about what it's really like to be in your 30s. I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. And this week, I have decided to record an episode that I have been mulling over for, I want to say weeks, but it's probably months. And it's about the challenges of our 30s and the lessons that we can learn. Because I don't know about you, but for me, I can truly say that on some level, I was taught or conditioned, or I don't know, maybe it was just a childhood, teenage years perception that I think I clung onto until my at least late 20s, that by the time I turned 30, I would have my ducks in a row. I would have life figured out. I would know what I wanted, what my purpose was. I would have a great group of friends. I would have money in the bank. I would probably own a property, all of the things. But most importantly, I think that on some level, I truly believed that when I was quote unquote an adult, that life would be easier. And as we all know, this isn't even about being in your 30s. It's just about being a human being, that life never really gets easier. There's always external circumstances, there's always internal things that we're working on, and life can sometimes feel really lifey. And I've been thinking about that phrase a lot because, wow, the past week, I've had the most lifey experience of life. And it really reminded me that it's important to speak about these things out loud. I really always try to come up and share vulnerably and authentically on my Instagram about what's going on behind the scenes, but sometimes it is really impossible to go to those depths on stories, which is why I love the podcast. And I really, I've just been really thinking how we don't need to always air everything bad that happens, but it's really good to look at when things are going wrong or things aren't going as expected, whether that's big things or daily things. We have so much to learn. And I was thinking a lot about how in my 30s, every single year of my 30s, something has happened in that year that has changed the trajectory of where I thought my 30s would go, or presented a problem or a challenge, or just something that was a bump in the road, that in the end, looking back in hindsight, they say hindsight is 2020. I really am glad that it happened, even though at the time it felt many times like my world was crumbling, or my perception of how my life would be was crumbling. So that's what this episode is about. It's a very personal share, looking back at every single year of my 30s and what I was currently going through at that time, and the lessons that I learned from it. So just before we dive in, I've understood that it's important at the start of each episode to talk about where you can find me and where you can join my community. I actually just wanted to do a huge shout out to the 35 women who opted in to become the founding members of my Turning community, which just got launched last week. It was so amazing. It's been a project that I have been dreaming up and working on for years. I would say 4 years plus of thinking about how I can take the clients from all over the world that I work on and put them all together in the same virtual room. And now it's finally happened. So just a shout out to all of those women who joined. Well done for taking that step. And I'm really excited that you're going to help form the community, and you're going to play such a big part in what I know is going to be truly huge. It's going to be a really safe space. And the coolest thing happened. So my big thing is about bringing women from their 30s from all over the world together, and to make sure that you all know that you are not alone. So no matter where you live, no matter whether you're 31, 38, regardless of age, that there is probably somebody else out there who is going through that. And my big vision and big dream is that the community will become so big and so full of so many women, thousands of women, that will be able to do meetups all around the world. And actually, within the first 3 days of the members joining the community, one of the girls mentioned, she did her introductory post that she's living in Hong Kong, and another one of the women in the group replied saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm actually in Hong Kong next week for a conference. Let's meet up." And they just messaged me, both of them, to tell me that they're meeting for a coffee date in Hong Kong next week, which is so cool because I know so many in my community love solo travel, love going on adventures, often around the world on retreats, doing really amazing things. So such a great way that you can meet new people. So yes, that is a huge celebration for turning 30, the brand new community. The doors have now closed whilst we're working on the beta group, working to make sure that the community is amazing for the rest of you. And in a few weeks, the community doors will open back up for everybody else. So I definitely will keep everyone posted on my Instagram, and you can go and follow me at Turning 30 Coach. In the meantime, let's talk about challenges and lessons learned from each year of my 30s. So I feel like I should start at 29 because 29 was my year that I really, I guess, had a reckoning. It was the year that I decided enough is enough. I'm turning 30 and I feel very, very lost. But I think I'll talk about the year of 30, and it will incorporate the 29th year as well. So when I was 30, my biggest challenge that I was facing that year was not having a clue what I wanted to do for work, and really ending up that year going back to the drawing board. So for context, and for those of you who are listening and want to know fully more in depth about my journey and my career journey, I invite you to go right to the start of the podcast, first episodes. I think it's episode number 5, where I actually share my journey from becoming a lawyer in my 20s and then leaving, and what happened, and the more in-depth story. But as an update, in my 30th year, I was at this point had already left law, had many a different job, and I was working for a company that did corporate sponsorship for pharmaceutical companies, which is hilarious now looking back because it is so not me. And during this year, I felt really lost because I knew that I wanted to do something with my psychology degree. I really felt like connected. I originally had studied psychology before I studied law, and I'd always made a promise to myself to come back to it. And I think in my head that promise had been, in my 30s I'll come back to it. And then I'm 30 and I'm not enjoying my job. I was really struggling and I didn't know what to do. And it was quite a stressful time. And I remember every single week deciding that I wanted to be something else. There was one week when I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and study a master's in brain neuroscience because I really love, and most of you who know me will know that I love anything about brain and psychology, and it just felt really aligned. Then the week after I was like, no, I want to go into tech and be a coder, and started to learn HTML and coding, which is hilarious because that really isn't me at all. But the point is that I felt really lost. And actually, I think this was the year that I was already working with a coach and a therapist, and I was really coming into my own and understanding how amazing journaling is and having these open conversations and just waking up to the world of self-development. But I was like a pressure cooker waiting to explode with how much I hated my job and how difficult I found my manager and the work itself and the travel. I was traveling a lot to conferences all over the world, and I just had enough. And one day, I remember it quite clearly, I just quit. And I have a whole episode also about why I'm a quitter and how I love it. And I do love quitting, but all of a sudden I found myself in this huge challenge of not having a clue what I wanted to do and no job. I was very lucky because they had a long notice period and they actually asked me to stay on as a freelancer because they didn't want me to just leave, and they were struggling. And yeah, but in general, this was a very turbulent time. I remember applying for a few different jobs at this time and getting knockbacks, and then deciding that I wanted to go down the coaching route and become a coach myself. But I started a course but didn't have any clients. And that's a whole next part of the journey. But the point is that this 30th year was really challenging because I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do, and I felt like I should already know. So the lesson here, the first lesson, is that actually turning 30 is the age to change your career. I don't believe in regrets. I do think maybe looking back, I could have done it less abruptly and had some sort of plan in place. But now I realize that the 30th year is a signpost, is a signpost for the next part of your life, the next decade. And actually, it's a great time to reassess. It's a great time to say, well, I've been out of studying. For me, it had only been a few years, but for many people by this point, it could be for anywhere from between 5 years to 8 years, depending on if you even studied. But I've been in the working world for a really long time now. And actually, the thing that I'm currently doing doesn't work. I'm going to work. And for me, and I know for many of my listeners, at the age of 30, I didn't have responsibilities. I didn't have children, or I didn't have a mortgage, and didn't have many outgoings. And yes, I never received any support from anybody along the way when it came to rent and living costs, but I was able to make it work. And I also feel like this age is a good age to just go and explore. So that's the first lesson of my 30s. The next year, 31, brought an even bigger lesson. And again, it was career related. The challenge that it brought me was failing to get my business off the ground and ending up going back to work after I couldn't make it work. So I was on a podcast recently as a guest, and the guest had been digging into my story and had listened to the podcast, and she picked up on this and asked me very specific questions about it. And I thought to myself, wow, I haven't actually thought about that part of my journey for so long, because now it feels so accurate that I had to go through that. It feels like such a huge part of the journey. And it doesn't feel like resistance when I think about it. I feel no shame. I don't feel regret. But then I was transported back to that time and how difficult it felt to go through that. And I remember really struggling with the fact I was 31. I had been trying for over 12 months to make it as a coach, and I had been banging what felt like banging my head against a brick wall. And it got to the December of that year, and I had given myself until the January to make it work. And then I was confronted with a decision. What should I do? Should I go back into the working world with my tail between my legs, or should I just get a job in a coffee shop and also continue with the coaching? And the first job wasn't necessarily to let go of coaching. I just knew it would be taking up a lot of energy to get a new job, and it would have to put the coaching a little bit on the back burner. And wow, this was a really tough challenge, because, and I think it's something not spoken about enough. And for those of you listening who are entrepreneurs, or you want to be an entrepreneur, it's very disheartening to think about the fact that you can make that huge leap. And I remember saying, I'm never going to work back in corporate again, or I'm never going to get a job again, and this is my big break. And actually, it wasn't my big break. And I went back and got a job. And I decided to take the first option and go and get a full-time job. And it was really hard. And it did feel like my tail was between my legs. And it felt like at the end of the day, I had failed. But now looking back, I see why I had to go and get that job and how it benefited my business in the long term. Because I ended up firstly taking a job for 6 months that reminded me exactly of why I didn't want to work in a big company in corporate. I then quit and left to take an entry-level job, which was a bit unheard of at the time. And I remember so many people being shocked when I said, okay, I'm going to be earning this amount. I was starting to work with other people who were 10 years younger than me. Really, it was an entry level. I was just finished university, and I was there with 2 degrees, 3 years experience being a manager. And I was like, no. But the company itself was really connected to the idea of coaching. They were a company, a startup that was really focused on personal development, and you could do courses about how to get into the world of tech, and also how to develop yourself professionally. And it ended up being that I learned so much this year about being a business owner, about sales. I was working in sales and I learned so much about how to sell coaching. So now looking back, I don't think I would have ended up being a fully booked coach had I not actually gone back to work at this point. So it was almost like the universe was saying, you're not quite ready yet to launch your coaching business, but very soon you will be. So just do this one thing, go back to work, and then we'll bring you the opportunity. So the lesson here is sometimes, even though it feels really hard, you have to take a step back to take a huge step forward. And this really goes against that feeling that we have in our 30s or in our lives where we think that everything should be linear. We think that things should happen in order. So if you've got a job, you think the next step will be to be promoted. Or if you start a business, you think the success will just come in a linear fashion. And we know this isn't true, but when you're in that, it feels really hard. So this is a reminder to any of you who are feeling like, in terms of your career or anything in your life, that you have to take a step back. And I know a lot of my clients that I work with feel like that sometimes when they have to move back in with their parents in order to be able to afford to rent somewhere or to save money or to go on a solo travel trip or to do something more bold. And remember, sometimes taking a step back in the future is going to just be leaps forward. So now we're in the 32nd year of my 30s. Let's jump forward to the next challenge. So now I'm 32 and I had 2 years of extreme change with career. And I want to just put the careers to the side at the moment because I think my biggest lesson in my 32nd year was something that I didn't really deal with at the time. But now I can look back and see just how challenging it was for me. And this challenge was that I was in the wrong relationship. And I knew that I was in the wrong relationship, but I was still afraid to leave. And I'm saying this because I want to share this because I receive messages almost weekly from those of you in my community asking what to do because you know that you are in a relationship that isn't working and you just don't know how to let go of the relationship. You're afraid to be single, you're nervous to date again, you are worried that you won't ever meet anybody else, you're worried about having children in the future. And I just want to say that this is a challenge that I went through at the age of 32, and it was a big feature of the year. And I remember having lots of arguments. I remember having lots of doubts. I remember my friends were really questioning the relationship and I was really trying to block them out and moving away from them. I really went into my own bubble because I knew deep down that this wasn't the relationship for me. But I was too nervous to embrace a new path. I was really, really uncomfortable thinking that I was going to be 33 plus and single. And this was really linked to my fertility fears. It was really linked to the thought that maybe I wouldn't be able to have a baby, and that I really genuinely thought that this person was the person that I would do it with. Now I look back and I remember those times. I remember I would often try to put it into a box in the side of my head, and it would come out a lot in health issues. Like I remember going to my acupuncturist or starting to go to an acupuncturist, and I was covered in eczema and dry skin. I was having problems with my stomach. My IBS was flaring up. I was not sleeping. I remember I just had no energy, had really bad allergies, all of the things. And I think my body was just screaming at me to make a change. And I think the relationship was the change that needed to happen. And I even remember my acupuncturist at the time, he said to me, "How is your relationship? How is it? How's your life at home?" And I remember going, yeah, all fine. I'm with someone, we've been together for a few years now. Everything's great. And really deep down, thinking, well, actually, no, this isn't the right person. And I used to have showers and I used to get in the shower every night and think in my head, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? So now I look back and the lesson really, really is that it is better to be alone than to be in the wrong relationship in your 30s. And I always say this to people, and podcast listeners will have heard me say it before. When you are in that space where you're in a relationship where you know you need to break up, you're adding another obstacle in the way for actually meeting the right person. Now, I look back and I feel like even though the decision was maybe very obvious to other people, for me, I needed to go through this not knowing. I needed to go through this time of questioning and asking, because in the end, it created space for me to step into my worth. And I think that without this relationship, I maybe would never have stepped into my worth. I could have met somebody else who also would have been a better fit. And maybe we would have taken those next steps together, but probably this would have come around at some point, this feeling of not being worthy. And I also want to encourage any of you who are going through this and this challenge and the lesson in it resonates with you, is that the thing that helped me the most was getting support. And that was with therapy and coaching. And I remember having one specific coaching session where I really got clarity. And that was actually what led me to instigate the breakup in the end and to walk away from this big relationship. But I think that, it's very, very challenging. And I just want to validate everyone to be in a place where you're uncertain about the future, but lying to yourself or hiding it away is going to come out in other ways eventually. So then we're led to the challenge of 33, because I was going to say spoiler alert, but as most of you already know, I then went through the breakup actually on the eve of my 33rd birthday. And I think the biggest challenge of 33, and it was really hard for me to pick this one because my 33rd year was really expansive and loads of amazing things happened, but there was a really hard start to the year. And I often think of the 33rd year and think of all the amazing things that happened afterwards. The solo travel, the friends that I met, the business taking off, the leaps, the quantum leaps that happened to me that year. But actually, those first 3 months of my 33rd year, I was really struggling. And the challenge that I was struggling with was to be alone. It was the going from living with somebody, and I had been with roommates and I never lived alone before. And then I had moved in with my ex, and then we had broken up, and I decided that I didn't want to live with roommates again. And all of a sudden, I found myself alone. Now, I do want to say, for some context, not to throw myself a pity party, but this was wild because it was right in the middle of COVID. So it was after the first lockdown was when we broke up. And then there were, I think, 3 more lockdowns that I went through completely by myself. And I went through the breakup, moved in alone, wasn't working. I was running my own business at this point. So I didn't have colleagues. My friends obviously were all going through the same things, but many of my friends were already in relationships at this point. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of a lockdown. There was so much uncertainty. And then I'm living by myself. And it was really, really hard because I think I was like lonely internally. And I think I was also very isolated. It was very, very isolating. And there were those few months where that challenge just felt too much. And it literally felt like my world was falling apart. And I do want to say, since then I have struggled with my mental health more in relation to postpartum and having a baby. But during this time, it was very circumstantial. Like I definitely felt much better being out of the relationship. I felt more me. I was really working to come back to my authentic self. I was finally doing work that felt aligned. But I also was, again, single for the first time in however many years, and spending extreme amounts of time completely by myself. And I remember one time calling my sister, hysterical, crying that everything had gone wrong. My 30s or my life looked completely differently to how I thought. I felt like a failure. I couldn't believe that everything had turned out this way. And most importantly or most dramatically was this feeling of I don't have other people. And then something shifted and loads of different things happened, but I started to look for the glimmers. I love the concept of glimmers. It's like the opposite of a trigger. It's the little moments where you feel hope, or you feel that you're coming back to yourself, or you feel excitement. And yeah, I felt all of those things. I felt hope. I felt excited. I felt like opportunity. And I felt like I had to almost go to that place of really, really facing loneliness head on in order to rebuild, and to build back my life. And when I tell people now, often when I'm speaking in other people's podcasts or speaking with podcast guests on my podcast, I often talk about my turning 30 journey being in two parts. And it was the part where I was when I was 29 and turning 30, and I first woke up to personal development work and coaching and just therapy and all of the things. And then the second part, which is this part where I went through this huge breakup and also panic, and how I rebuilt my life. And I think it's really important to say that the biggest part of this time was actively working on myself. It was doing really intense healing. It was getting really, really, really comfortable with being alone and just being Emma with no definitions, because at this point I had lost all the things that had defined me before. And yeah, the healing work is really hard. I talk a lot in coaching about how to feel your feelings and express emotions. And this was just a huge one for me at the time, because I'm really good at talking and I'm not that good at actually feeling my feelings. But I do remember one day I was in Costa Rica and I was on the beach and I was listening to a playlist and I just started crying. And this was like a good 7 months, 8 months after the breakup. And I thought I was healing or had gone a long way. And I just started sobbing for hours and listening to music and letting myself feel. And nothing had happened. It was just emotions that were coming to the surface from the past. And I just felt huge wave of relief afterwards. I just felt like I'd cleansed myself. And yeah, I felt ready for what life was going to throw at me. And I do remember that trip was really, really instrumental with healing. And it brings up all the feels now to think about it. And even though there were so many periods of time during that whole year, my 33rd year, and actually also my 34th year, where I was alone and I was struggling, but so much goodness came from it. And so I look back now in the stage of life that I'm at now, and I long for that. I long for that Emma who was healing and who was learning how to love herself just for who she was, and who was looking back to her life as a solo person in the world and didn't have to take other people into account. And I really feel I long for her. I also feel really, really proud of her. So the lesson of my 33rd year was that the hardest and the loneliest times in your life will be the times that you learn the most about yourself. They will be the times, the reckoning will be the time that you will be called to explore yourself, and it will shape your 30s. It will shape who you are becoming and who you truly, truly are. Now, year 34. I think this was actually a really challenging year, because even though the 33rd year was the lonely challenge, I had a really expansive year. So it was almost like all of the jigsaw puzzles pieced together and things started to take off. And my 34th year felt like a bit of an anticlimax, actually. It felt like the 33rd year had been so expansive for my personal life and friendships and my business and healing when it came to relationships. And then the 34th year came and it was like, okay, you kind of already done the things. So what next? And I did really love this year, actually. And now I'm having flashbacks of it because I'm really just speaking about all of this kind of ad hoc. And I remember that this was the year that I moved into my brand new apartment. I was renting, but I took a huge leap and took a really big rent. But it was an apartment that I just loved. I thrived in that apartment and I felt such a deep connection to it. And so it was an amazing, amazing year. But of course, like any year, there were still challenges to be had. And I think the challenge of my 34th year was when I was feeling left behind. I really struggled this year with feeling that I was behind in the milestones. And I think this was specifically the 34th year in those few months up to my running up to my 35th birthday. And I think the biggest trigger was that my closest friend hit all the milestones quite suddenly. She'd been in a relationship for years. I think she was with her now husband for 6 or 7 years before they decided to take all those next steps. But when it happened, it all happened very, very quickly. And I felt so left behind because in a way, I have loads of friends who are married, who had already had 2 babies by this point. But this specific friend, she is my ally, and we did everything together. And then all of a sudden she like jumped a few steps ahead. And it was so challenging to me. And this was the year that I really fell off the wagon of the things that I teach. And that's really hard, right? Because when you're a coach and you're speaking to your audience all day, every day about these things, you want to be the one who has your shit together. But all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, but like I'm exactly who I need. I need coaching. I need myself to coach me. And it was very difficult. I remember the weeks before her wedding, I was being very triggered by the wedding talk. I remember feeling really, really alone again and like not having a plus one. I remember feeling like a bit of an alien on the hen party when everyone was talking about their partners, and just in general it just brought up a lot of things for me, and I was really craving all those things. And in a way it was like the high of the adrenaline post break up glow up that had definitely happened age 33 was a bit starting to wear off. And it was very difficult to navigate the friendship during that time. It was very difficult to be true to myself and also be a good supportive friend, which I'm not ashamed to say I probably wasn't at some times. And yeah, I remember also, now it's all flooding back, that I was also starting to date in a more aligned way. And that meant that I kept getting rejected. I was getting rejection after rejection because I was putting my cards on the table more into saying what I want and being more upfront. And yeah, I look back and think, I wish I would have handled this time a little bit better, but it definitely had to happen this way for a reason. So the lesson here is that, firstly, we all go through these challenges, no matter how much healing and work we've done on ourselves. And I think most importantly here is that where your friends are in their timelines has absolutely nothing to do with you, and vice versa. And I'm really learning that even more now as a mother, looking at how I look at my single best friend's life and how she is navigating her life. And I'm like, wow, I would love to be doing those things. I would also love to be on a retreat right now or doing those amazing things that I don't have the opportunities to do anymore in this period, in this chapter of my life. So yeah, the lesson is very strong that your friends are going to be on different timelines to you, and it doesn't mean anything about you and where you are. And luckily our friendship was strong enough to survive what we went through, but it was very hard. It was very, very challenging. So yes, reminding you all that it's okay to have all of these thoughts. And actually, a huge reason why I started the Turning community, the new membership, is because I didn't really have anywhere to turn. I felt like I couldn't really turn to my single friends because as much as they got it, they were a bit like, some of them didn't feel the same way as me, and some of them were feeling like they were triggered by me being triggered. And I felt like I didn't necessarily want to always share it with them. It felt almost like I was constantly almost like dragging them down. And I also felt like it sometimes turned into rants that weren't necessarily helpful or constructive. I couldn't share it with my friend herself, this person who was going through all of these things. I didn't ever want to, dampen what she was going through, even though we did in the end have some really good conversations about it when we needed to. But I also felt like my partnered friends didn't really get it either. They were a bit like, oh, well, it will happen to you eventually. Don't worry. Like, it's going to happen soon. We're all on different timelines. And my friends who were partnered also really didn't get it. They had a really different perspective, and they didn't understand. They couldn't resonate or relate to me. And often the response when I did try to speak to them about it was, oh, don't worry, you'll be there soon. Everything's fine. You'll get there in the end. You don't know what's going to happen. And like a lot of it wasn't dismissive, but it felt dismissive to me. So yeah, it was a time when I really craved a constructive, supportive community. And I wish I would have had Turning. I wish I would have had this place to go where I could say, oh my gosh, my friend just announced she was pregnant and it completely blindsided me. And I feel super guilty for having all of these emotions about it because I am happy for her, but I'm really sad for myself. Does anybody else feel like this too? And be supported with warmth and with understanding. So that's really why I created the community. Okay, now we're up to 35. So I guess we should jump forward, and just as a bit of an update for those listening who don't know my story, after all of these struggles, decided to freeze my eggs, and I did that just after my 35th birthday. And then I started dating my now husband, who we were friends before. So we kicked off quite quickly the relationship because we had been friends for over 2 years and we knew each other for even longer than that. And my challenge for the 35th year was welcoming somebody new into my life after so long of being alone. So I've spoken about this a little bit in the past episodes, so I won't dive into it too much. And I actually discussed it a little bit in last week's episode. But at this point in time, by my 35th birthday, with all of the lessons that I had been learning, I had truly become so happy and comfortable in my own space. I'd become so happy and comfortable being free, doing what I wanted to do. I was overworking a lot because, I had a lot of spare time and I love my work. And yeah, I was just so in my own comfort zone. And I was loving my 30s. I was a poster girl for being in your 30s and loving it. And I did still really want to meet somebody. And then actually, when this person came into my life, I quite quickly and all of a sudden was like, oh no, now I have to take someone else into account. Now someone is in my space all the time. Now I don't have so much time to do my own things. If I just want to have a day where I'm completely alone, and I couldn't. I was in a relationship and the relationship was getting quite serious. And all of a sudden, I had a new person to take into account. And yeah, wow, really challenging. Something that we don't speak about enough because society celebrates being in a relationship so much more than being single, that we forget that actually being single has being in a relationship has some downsides. And we definitely forget the beauty of being single in our 30s. So I want to say here that the challenge really manifested itself in the relationship itself, and me pulling back because I was like, oh, and really struggling. We would often spend whole weekends together. We were both busy in the week with work, and then we would spend whole weekends either staying at one of our apartments. And after the weekend, I would just feel so saturated with being in somebody else's space or them being in mine that I would be like, I just need to be alone. And obviously for Ellie, that was really hard to navigate because we're in a new relationship, and then all of a sudden the person that you're dating is like, hold up, I just need my alone time. And we had to have many conversations about it. And luckily, we had the skills and the communication and the awareness to work through it. But it wasn't easy. And I really think the lesson here for me was and is that there is beauty in every single step and stage of life. There's beauty in every stage of your 30s. Again, because we so, as a society, put value on being in a relationship, we forget the beauty of being single. And I think this is an important reminder for anyone, no matter where you are in your journey, because we can often get into grass is greener syndrome and think, oh my God, but I just wish that I already had the baby, or I just wish that I was already met the person. But we sometimes forget to be present and actually enjoy where we are now. And this leads to the 36th year challenge, which was the fact that we became pregnant very quickly, a lot quicker than we anticipated. And it did come as a shock. And this for me was, and again, building on the last challenge of welcoming someone new into my life, now I was welcoming a whole new identity. And it really did feel like whiplash. And it's the only way I can describe it, was that all of a sudden, everything changed. I was pregnant. I was carrying a baby. I hadn't really thought about it before. It was weird because for many years I froze my eggs and I was really taking steps to look after my fertility, but I just didn't think it would happen yet. So I was kind of future planning, like, okay, I'm going to be in a relationship and we'll be together for a couple of years and then we'll have a baby. And this happened within the first year. And the struggle now, I mean, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, how crazy was the story? How crazy was this circumstance that I was so worried about not having something, and then suddenly I had it and I was like, oh, do I even want this? And then you add in all the hormones, you add in all of the like the challenges to the relationship that it brought up, that we had kind of leaped forward so quickly. And it just felt really, really overwhelming. So I think here that this challenge was something that I never anticipated, because I genuinely believed when I get the thing, and this is what we all think with goals, when I reach the goal that I've been working so hard towards, life will just be perfect and I'll just feel good. And I actually hadn't taken into account how how great I had been and how amazing the first half of my 30s had been, and how now I had this new identity to shift into, and I had this new person to take into account, and this new future baby to look after. And I guess the lesson here is that you can really want something so much, and when you get it, still have doubts. And I want to say that because it's something I went through, and it's something I see time and time and time again with clients. I cannot tell you the amount of times I work with women who finally get the relationship that they've been manifesting, and then they say, why doesn't it feel so good? Why is it so hard? Or they finally quit their job and start their own business, and then they're like, it's just not how I imagined. So yeah, I think that's really important to recognize that it's okay. There's nothing wrong with having those doubts. It's all part of the human experience, because when as much as we can be goal oriented, we still, within that goal that we've achieved, have a human brain. We have the doubts. The next and final challenge, I'm actually going to do a bit of a cliffhanger, and it's not because I want to keep you hooked. It's actually because I haven't processed it yet. And the challenge of my 37th year that I'm going through is health, and really struggling. I struggled a lot postpartum with health, and I maybe have mentioned it on the podcast. I can't even remember how much details I gave, because I did do an episode about being a mum at 36, and I think I probably alluded to it then, but I can say now that I've just come out of one of the hardest years of my life in terms of my health. And I'm actually on a really, really intense healing journey. And I'm talking healing internally and externally, because I've actually discovered how much the mind body relationship is at play here with what's going on with me, linked very much to the identity shifts and the learning how to be alone and so comfortable, and now in this new phase, and how I think that everything moving really quickly and getting pregnant and all of the physical changes and birth and the mammoth change of lifestyle that I've been through has actually really affected my health for the negative, and I'm working on it. And it's really, I'm actually excited. I just got goosebumps when I was saying it, because I know that it's something that I'm going to be speaking about on here. And I actually had a dream the other night, imagining I was at a conference. And I actually had a dream the other night where I was on stage speaking about this healing journey, which I think is really a premonition, because I know that I'm in the middle of learning so much right now about health and about my hormones and about my fitness, and about the link between my inner child and my external world and all of the subconscious things. There's just I'm really very deep into it at the moment. And I know that once I've gone through these huge lessons of my 37th year, and I'm sure it will be lifelong, but I cannot wait to process them all and share them with you. And I think that there's going to be a lot of wisdom. And this is really important, because actually in the bad days and the days where I'm feeling more unsure, I remember that I know that other people are going to benefit from hearing about what I'm going through in the future, as well as future Emma, who will also benefit. So yeah, I think that they are the main lessons and the main challenges of my 30s. I invite you all as a journal prompt to go through the years of, do the past 5 years. So whether if you're 30, do from the age of 25. If you're 35, do the first 5 years of your 30s. Whatever age you are, go and write down on a piece of paper the number on the left, write down the biggest challenge that you went through that year, and then write down the lesson that you learned from it. And it's really important to do this work so you can learn to take each lesson forward, because the lessons come with you and you'll just be getting wiser and wiser. And that's why I love my 30s so much. So thank you so much for being here with me. If you're still here, and I look forward to seeing you all on the podcast next week.